Hello, I'm Rachael Babin from the Oncology podcast. I'm here with Dr Jennifer Cohen, who is the evaluation manager at Canteen. She is a paediatric dietitian who worked at the Kids Cancer Centre at the Sydney Children's Hospital for 15 years. Today we're talking about robots. Us grown-ups have had our fair share of moans over the last 18 months with the COVID-19 experience. But it must have been quite seismic for young people being treated with cancer. So the wonderful folks over at Canteen have a new pilot program using telepresence robots to help young cancer patients adjust back to the school routine. The aim is to facilitate school-patient connection, reduce isolation, and improve well-being for young cancer patients. As always, you'll find links to the paper, Jennifer's bio, and the Twitter handles in the notes on our website. For regular news and podcast updates, subscribe to the Oncology newsletter for free on oncologynews.com.au. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. This is Rachael Babin, and this is the Oncology podcast. Hi, Jen. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, lockdowns are over for now, at least, we hope, and we're getting kids back into school. And this means young people with compromised immune systems too. What are the main problems that you identified with the return to school after such a long period of isolation?
So there's actually a lot of research in children and adolescents, so young people with chronic conditions and absences from school. And, we see this in the research that the more, a child or an adolescent misses school, the more academic challenges they're going to have. And it's going to lead to poorer academic performance. And, it can end up leading to things like, children having to repeat a year of school when they're older, which we know can really impact, not only their confidence, but their well-being. And also, they're having to repeat a year. So they're moving away from the peers that they've potentially gone through school with. So then, they're less likely to, potentially finish education or go into secondary education. And again, this can lead to issues such as poor well-being. So, what we then start seeing is, a feeling of isolation because they're not with the peers that they grew up with, and, issues with social confidence. And really, for a lot of kids with, say, chronic disease, that feels like they're missing out on all the fun things that happen at school. And you know what? We do know from the research that children with chronic illness are twice as likely to experience moderate to high levels of emotional distress than their peers. So we know missing school does have big psychosocial impacts on young people.
So that covers definitely the periods of absence that must be quite common for young cancer patients.
Yeah, definitely.
And are there any other factors that go towards this in terms of their overall well-being, their mental health?
What we do know is that, school is not just about education. So that's one factor when you come to school, but it's also about that peer connection, that social support. And think of especially adolescents. It's the time when you're becoming independent, and it's a time when you're looking at your place in the world. If that gets disrupted because you're not engaging with school for long periods of time, we know that can then lead to, things like anxiety, depression, and distress. So we definitely see sort of that progression from not, missing school up to sort of psychological disruption over time.
So let's get stuck into some serious robot talk. How did they work? Did they move around with the patient? Did they attend lessons? Did they talk? Did they interact?
Yeah, I know everyone sort of thinks, what do we mean by a telepresence robot? So they call them a telepresence robot, which is a form of information communication technology, which is a very fancy word. And there are actually lots of different telepresence robots around there. And on a podcast, this is going to be harder to explain. But really what they are, in essence, is a remote controlled device, and it's wirelessly connected. And it allows both audio and video connection, and it can be mobile or stationary. So imagine a young person is, say, in their hospital bed, or they're at home and they're having their cancer treatment, and they're on, say, a computer or an iPad. And in the school is this telepresent robot, and they can use their iPad or their computer to almost to control this robot. And the robot that's in the school is, I guess sometimes think of them, there's a few different ones, but think of it as an iPad on a stick, which is on some of them that move around or on a Segway. And so then they move around. They're quite tall, actually. Or there's ones that are more stationary that sit on a bench and they sort of have an iPad that moves around. And I think the most important sort of aspects of a telepresence robot is the fact that they can move around. So the young person in the hospital bed while they're having their, chemotherapy can actually move this robot around. So they could maybe, have the robot looking at their teacher while they're teaching, or they could turn it around to see what's going on in the classroom. The ones that are actually mobile, they can actually, steer it out of the classroom and through, into the corridors. And the ones that are on the more stationary, they swivel up to about 270 degrees. So it's more than just having imagine it's different to just having an iPad on the desk, because they can control the head. So they can, again, look at what's the teacher saying. If, say, a student is talking, they can swivel it around and look at a student. So it's really about having, the robots in the classroom and the young person is controlling it. And there are a few different versions available out there. And we use at Canteen both the stationary and the mobile versions.
Okay, so fantastic. So the idea is that the robot goes to school whilst the child can't.
Yes, exactly.
I see. And so are they used primarily for lessons, or does the robot go outside for lunch break and sit and gossip?
Actually, you know what? Both. And I think that's what we found actually when we did our pilot is that, I think when people think of a telepresence robot, they're thinking it primarily for that, that being able to be lessons so they're not missing school. And as we know, I said before that, that academic, that they're missing school and, can lead to issues with, having to repeat. But what was really interesting is that for our young people who use the robot, it's having that peer connection was actually sometimes more important than the academic. So in essence, if a young person was using it because they wanted to connect with their friends and see their friends, then yes, they could actually take the robot and roll it outside. And we hear stories of some of our more extroverted young people who actually love rolling the robot down the corridor, and people actually say hello because they can see the person's face on the robot. And so they actually can, if they've got the capability, can actually roll the robot outside, and it can sit, with them at lunchtime if they wanted. And also even the stationary ones, their friend can take the robot outside and they can sit with it. So, yes, we want to use it from an academic perspective when we found that for our older adolescent patients, so those who are, say, getting closer towards the end of school, they really wanted to use it more for academic. They wanted to be listening in the classroom, make sure they're not missing out. But for our younger adolescents, our 12 and 13-year-olds, for them it was all about that social and peer connection. And you know what? It was really about just that feeling that they weren't missing out on anything. And I think that was the most important aspect. When we were doing our sort of early research before we started the robots program, we were talking to young people about the robots. And, a lot of them said, when they went back to school after missing, a big chunk of time, and we're talking, children with cancer could be missing, 9 to 12 months of school. So when they go back to school, they actually feel like they're starting at a new school and they're starting again because they've missed out on so much. So for the robot is for some young people, it is about that peer connection, that social connection, that not feeling like they missed out. And for others, it really is about the academic and feeling like that, they're listening to what's happening at school.
It's interesting. And I guess with a lot of education being delivered online recently in the last few months as well, did you find that the children, the adolescents enjoyed the process, that they were used to having that kind of tele-education set up anyway?
Yeah. What is interesting, because we haven't done too much research in that area, but I've been thinking about it. And I actually wonder if, so Sydney's just, had 4 months of homeschooling. I've just done it. So I've got a 7 and a 9-year-old. And I was actually thinking that if anything, lockdown, and I have I'd love to, talk to young people about this, but I have a feeling lockdown and homeschooling actually would have been more beneficial for young people during cancer treatment, because they could be on Zoom with their friends and not feel like they're missing out because their friends, nothing was happening at school because all their friends were at home. So I actually wonder if the last 12 to 18 months, especially when a place is in lockdown and all their friends are on Zoom at home. So they're doing exactly what their friends are doing. If it was actually a little bit easier, which is also going to be then harder because now all their friends are back at school. So they might have had this 4 months, say in Sydney, where they were connecting with their friends and they were doing exactly what their friends were doing. And now they're like, oh, now I'm missing out again. So I think it potentially could have been easier there for a while for young people. And now it's again back to that. So they may have been used to that learning through a Zoom call or through an iPad, but they wouldn't have felt like they were missing out during lockdown. And I feel like that going back to school now means that young people are like, now we're back to square one. Now now a robot is going to be even more important because we want to get that connection back.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you said about how it must feel about starting a new school really resonates, particularly if your appearance has changed as well and, your outlook, certain facets of your personality when you go through something so big at such a formative age.
Definitely. And I was actually going to say along those lines, unfortunately, there are, we look at research that said there is actually increased bullying for young people sort of with cancer when they go back to school, which is really, really sad. And it is because of that. I know you sort of think surely, their friends are going to understand what they've been through, that they are going to look different and be different. But we the research shows that they are at risk of sort of increased bullying when they go back to school. So not only are they feeling like they're starting school again, but there's potential for increased bullying, which is why we're starting to, we are seeing issues with poorer well-being and anxiety and depression. It's not a surprise because of all the things they missed, and then this risk of bullying when they go back to school. It's really sad.
Gosh, that's heartbreaking. So to the results, do the robots work? Did the patients feel more connected? Have we got a happy ending?
Yes, we definitely have a happy ending. So when we've been trialing the telepresence robots program for about 2 years. Obviously, COVID has been during that, but there have been plenty of opportunities to trial the robots, in states that haven't been in lockdown and even states that before they went into lockdown. And what we did is we interviewed, the young person, the parents, the schools, because obviously the schools play a huge part in the telepresence robots program because there needs to be a lot of support from the school. And we sort of asked them about how they felt about the telepresence robot. And again, exactly what we'd expected to see is what we saw, that there was really two main benefits for having that telepresence robot. One was that academic. And again, as I said before, we found for the older adolescents, so maybe those in year 11 and 12 who really focused on the end of school, it was really, the robot really gave them a great way to feel like they're, attending school and that they weren't feeling like they were behind in their schoolwork. And I think that was really important. So we had that kind of group who the academic was really important. And then the other group, which I guess was the bigger group, was that the robots really were a great facilitator of social connection. And I think that's probably the most important part. The young people we interviewed said the robots really helped them to be able to connect with their peers that they had never been able to do before having a telepresence robot. And for some young people, it wasn't even about doing huge interactions with all their friends. We have that story of the young person liking to roll down the corridor and, everyone saying hello. But for some young people, just being able to sit there and listen to what was going on with their friends, what was being said, made them feel like they weren't missing out on things. And I think that is really what has then led to a lot of parents, especially, saying they just saw such a change in their child when they started the service. In fact, we have one story where it was a mum of an adolescent boy, and he was in hospital a lot for his treatment and was really, really sort of really flat, really depressed. And she said, yes, he was able to connect with his friends. We have social these days. We have FaceTime, we have, Snapchat, we have TikTok. But there was still that sense of missing out. But she said, the first time he used that robot, was able to even just, when they were just trialing it, it wasn't even being used sort of for a full classroom. It was just being trialed with some friends in a classroom. She said his whole mood changed just from that one kind of connection with their friends. So, imagine that was just one little connection with their friends, that his whole sort of mood changed. So imagine for those who are able to use the robot consistently and not feel like that they were, missing out. So I think what we found is definitely that not feeling like they're missing out from an academic perspective, not missing out on that peer connection. And the other aspect that we found is that for young people, it really gave them a sense of agency or a sense of control over their lives. Because, imagine for young people, and especially adolescents who are, this is the time in their lives where they're starting to get independence. They're starting to find their place in the world. And all of a sudden they're sick and all decisions are taken away from, their parents are looking after them again. They get no decisions. All their friends are now starting to go out and get their license and go to parties. And they've got no control over their lives. And the robot program was just this little bit in their life that they had control in the fact that they could control when they wanted to dial into the classroom, when they did it, whether they wanted to talk to their friends, whether they didn't. Even like, as I said before, we have 2 robots because every young person is different. So the young person could go, yes, I want a robot that's just going to sit in the corner and I can sort of sit here quietly. Or the young person who really wanted to be involved with the school community can say, I want the robot that moves around so everyone can see me. Again, it's that sense of agency, a sense of control that I think really helped improve our young people's well-being.
Yes, don't underestimate the power of being able to make your own decisions, even about small things.
Definitely. And imagine if you're an adolescent, even more so.
Yes, exactly. So robots in schools work. Are there plans to roll them out, get them to all the young cancer patients?
The answer is definitely. So we've actually, with the robots program, we've actually been lucky in Australia to try it in a few different states. So even our Canteen's head office is in Sydney. We've actually had robots go out to Sydney, also to rural and regional New South Wales. So about 3 or 4 hours south of Sydney. We've had them a couple up in Queensland. We've even had 2 down in Tasmania and 1 in South Australia. So we've shown that the robots can be rolled out. I feel like when I say rolled out, it's like a pardon the pun, because the robots roll, pardon the pun. So yes, we definitely want to now look at rolling out the robots to all around Australia. So, to WA, and especially when borders open. So maybe WA is a little bit away, but once our borders open in Australia, is being able to, that all young people around Australia can access a telepresence robot if they want to. And I think we always talk about the positives of COVID, sometimes we try to anyway, is that because of COVID, it's really shown that a telepresence robot is not just about the robot. There's a whole service that is sort of part of the telepresence robot. We have a coordinator who gives education to the school, gives education to the family, to the young person. We have an IT support. And what we've been able to do is do all of that support remotely. So really, for a young person to be able to have a telepresence robot, we can send that robot out to them, in even rural and remote areas, as long as they have pretty good Wi-Fi connectivity. That's probably the only thing that would stop a robot working. Then there's no reason why anyone in Australia can't have a robot, and then we can support that service remotely from our national office and from our state-based offices. So yes, the plan is definitely to roll them out sort of across Australia.
That's really heartening to hear about the equitable access, actually, because I was just about to ask you, do young people in regional and rural areas typically get included in these kind of fancy ICT programs?
I know you sort of assume that they don't, but like I said, I think what's been good is that we have been able to trial a telepresence robot outside of a capital city. So we've had, I think, a couple actually. They're about 3 hours south of Sydney. So again, out of Sydney, out of metropolitan Sydney. And as long as there's Wi-Fi and connectivity, and also and the reality is awareness of the program, then there's no reason why a young person can't be connected into the program. And I think, and again, every state is different. But in Australia, most young people, if they're being treated for cancer, are in a main hospital anyway. They're going to be up in Sydney. They're going to be up in, the main centres in Queensland. So the hospitals know to refer young people into this service. And so long as that they're told about the service, even if their school is 8 hours away from Sydney, long as the school has Wi-Fi, and I live 10 minutes from the centre of Sydney, sometimes I have worse Wi-Fi than they do in regional areas. So I'm not even joking. So long as they've got Wi-Fi, and remember the young person's going to be in Sydney potentially, or in Queensland or in Melbourne, but the school, there's no reason why we can't get a robot out to the school. And yeah, I think, and like you said, that equitable access is going to be, is really important. And I think we've showed that, like I said, we've got 2 robots in Tasmania, which is, great to see.
Yeah, that's awesome news. So the inevitable question now. So in an ideal world, all young people facing cancer treatment would have a telepresence PAL, but who's going to pay for it and who should manage it? Is it an education problem? Is it a healthcare problem?
Yes, great question. And I think, you know what, I don't think it's a one or the other. Like, it's not an education or a healthcare problem. It's a both. Like, what we'd love to see is them working together to look at how we can support young people with this program. And I think, a good example, and we've seen that there is good examples of programs where I think there's a program called New South Wales Health School Link program. So it's a program that's duly run by both Department of Education in New South Wales and New South Wales Health. So we've got a program there, and it's about supporting, about screening for mental health issues in the school environment, and then making referrals off to appropriate health services. Now, that's a New South Wales example, but we've seen a program that's been around for quite a few years that brings together health and education. And what we really want to see, though, is a national rollout. And I think the thing about COVID has highlighted in Australia is that Australia has both state-based health and state-based education, and they're very different across those. But ideally, what we want to be seeing from a robots program is really a national solution where we combine somehow health and education at a national program, really as a partnership, really to help improve outcomes for this really vulnerable cohort. So the answer to your question is, I don't think it's one or the other. But the ideal is that there's a national approach combining those 2 groups. So I think we've still got a little bit of work in that space. Because remember, obviously I've been talking specifically about young people with cancer and telepresence robots. And actually what I didn't say before is, I talked a bit about, young people with chronic disease, and they've got issues with missing school because of their disease. And of course, and young cancer patients actually miss even more school. They miss even more school than children with chronic disease. But again, children with chronic disease are still missing school. So really, this is, we're trialling this with young people with cancer, and we want to, this group's even more vulnerable. We see, higher levels of absences from school. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be also supporting young people with chronic disease. So if we could look at this from a national perspective, then really we're helping all young people with an illness to get supported through school when they're missing it.
So there are wider applications.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
How much does it cost? Are they expensive, the robots?
It depends on which robot you're looking at. The ones on the little stationary ones are about $3,000. But remember, that's not just for one person, because, say a young person has it for 6 months during their treatment, and for a paediatric patient, a cancer treatment can go anywhere from 3 months, maybe up to sort of 12 months if they have a bone marrow transplant. But even if a young person has it, say, for 3 to 6 months during their treatment, and then they transition back to school, and then the robot can be used for a new young person. But obviously, Canteen, we're supporting this program as well with IT support and, obviously service coordinators as well. So yes, there is a lot that goes into the program, but the robots itself, it's not just for one young person. They can be used over and over again for lots of young people over time. So there's lots of potential there.
That's fantastic. I've got a great vision of a special cupboard in the Canteen offices that you open it up and it's full of all the sleeping robots that haven't been sent out yet.
You know what? There is a cupboard that has that. But the funniest is that there is, obviously we haven't been in the office much recently, but I remember when I first started, there's one of the bigger robots that are on the Segway, and it's sitting up right near where we sit. And sometimes I think I heard when they first started using the robot, there was a few practical jokes played where someone's controlling it from their computer and all of a sudden moving the robot across the across the floor. So yes, I think that has been done, and I think there is a cupboard somewhere of robots. Actually, more like a room, like a space at the moment because no one's in the office. But yes, it's exactly what you're thinking, really. So yes.
So my last somewhat frivolous question. Have you programmed them to encourage the kids to eat their veggies?
Yes. You know what? I wish they could do that. I mean, what are we looking at? Was it 4% of Australian children eat enough fruit and veggies? So I think if we had a robot that did that, you know, I think we'd know about it by now, actually. I think we would definitely know about it because there are plenty of parents out there would pay a lot of money for that robot. So, you know, there we go. Future dreams for someone to design.
Fantastic. I'm a big fan of Canteen. I've always thought it's a very innovative organisation.
Yeah, it is.
It sounds like you have a lot of fun.
Definitely. I've loved working there.
Fantastic. So before we wrap up, I will make sure that we include the link to the paper in the show notes, but were there any other resources that you want to mention?
You know what? If you want to know more about the robots service or to look at referrals, then the best place to go is the Canteen website. So, you know, canteen.org.au. And the robots program, Canteen supports young people impacted by cancer 12 to 25 years. Obviously, this is a school-based program. So if you've got a young person undergoing treatment for cancer between the ages of 12 to 17, 18 years. So if they're in school, then there is the potential to make a referral for the young person. So all the information is on our Canteen website, as well as I mentioned a few of the other programs that I evaluate. So if you want to know anything more about any of our programs and services that Canteen has, just go onto the website and all the information is there.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I've had a lot of fun.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
We'll speak to you soon, Jen. Thank you.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Oncology Podcast. If you enjoyed today's edition and would like to subscribe, head over to our website, oncologynews.com.au, and sign up to our newsletter. Thanks for listening.